The Shepherd of the Black Death Pyrenees foothills, early spring 1348. Aneko returns from market to find his mountain valley changed. The mountain speaks in long silences, not with words, not with shouts, but in the hush between the wind and the snowmelt, in the pause before a raven calls, in the way a tree creaks just once, and then never again. My name is Aneko. They say it means the one who listens. And so I did, all my life listening to the hills, to the sheep, to the stones, and in the spring of 1348 I listened as the world began to end, not with thunder, but with silence. Let me take you there, to the green-brown valley cradled by the high Pyrenees, where smoke once curled from every chimney and the hills hummed with the sounds of living things. That year, the smoke began to vanish, one chimney at a time, and no one was left to stir the soup or tend the fires. Let me tell you what it was like. To be a shepherd when the sky began to forget us. It was the feast of St. Zeno when I last saw the town alive. I had walked 3 days down from the northern ridge, with a bundle of wool slung across my back and 2 cheeses nestled in a woven satchel, still smelling of thyme and sheep's milk. The market square in Osoko echoed with song and prayer. The baker's daughter, Irune, was dusted in flour and laughter. A Catalan juggler balanced knives and fate. A priest sprinkled ash on the head of a thief, and nobody asked why. And then came the whispers, soft as moth wings, carried from lips to ears like a contagious dream. They are dying in Toulouse. Half the town gone in a week. A ship from Genoa brought it. God is cleansing the earth, a punishment for the sins of pride. And still the fiddle played. And still I bought dried beans from a man with shaking hands. And still I bartered my wool for a length of dyed cloth I'd never get to wear. I didn't know then that this was the last laughter I'd hear that year. I left at dawn the next day. The wind was soft, and the sky had the color of warmed milk. As I climbed the trail home, the clouds brushed the stone peaks like an old woman's veil, and I carried no fear with me, only memories and dried figs. But when I reached the high valley, I smelled nothing. No smoke, no bread, just the raw, clean silence of absence. The first hut I passed belonged to old Matteo, whose hounds once barked at everything, even the sun, but now no bark. The door was open, swinging gently like a cradle. Inside, the stew pot was crusted and cold. No Matteo, no dogs, only a single woolen mitten, child-sized, dropped near the hearth. I called out, once, twice. The wind answered, nothing more. Further, up the slope, my mother's loom sat outside our hut, untouched. The weaving left half done, the shuttle paused mid-flight, as if her hands had simply vanished. And I stood there, with my bundle of market trinkets, with my head full of fiddle, songs and prayers, and I understood that I was alone. That night I did not light a fire. The sheep curled close, warm with body and breath, and the sky blinked down at me, ancient and indifferent. In dreams I saw the valley full again. The children raced between the sheep. The bells chimed in rhythm, and my mother called my name from across the stream. Her hands wet with lavender, but when I woke, the frost clung to my cloak and the birds would not sing. They say the Basque are old, older than the Romans, older than the language of kings. My grandfather used to tell me that the mountains remembered. U7 when the empires forgot. But now I wondered, would they remember me, a shepherd boy too stubborn to flee, too quiet to be noticed by death? I walked to the ridge and looked down at the valley. There were no plumes of chimney smoke, no herds moving across the lower pastures, only the hush of spring creeping in where voices once sang. And so I began to hum, a shepherd's lullaby, soft, old wordless, just so the hills wouldn't forget. This was the first day of silence, the first day I knew I was alone. But I did not yet know what it meant to carry a valley's memory in my chest. That lesson would come. Later, with the bones, with the songs, with the dreams that walked even when I slept. Sleep now, traveller, let the wind wrap around you like a woolen cloak. Let the valley speak in your dreams. And remember, not all who are forgotten are gone. Chapter 2. The hollow path of hoofprints days after Aneko returns home to find his valley emptied. He begins to follow trails left by others, searching for signs of life or death. The world grows quieter and stranger. I spent the next 3 days walking the hills, not because I thought I'd find anyone, not really, but because I didn't yet know how to sit still with the silence. There's a kind of echo that lives in the mountains. It doesn't come from sound, it comes from memory, where a child once fell laughing into the snow, where a goat once leapt from stone to stone, where someone once called your name in anger or joy. The place remembers. And when you walk those trails alone, the memory hums just under the surface. I followed hoofprints, some shallow, some deep, some doubled back, some led into trees. I didn't know what I was following, a person, a beast, or just a shadow. But I followed anyway. Zerby was a high hamlet, no more than 5 homes clustered around a shared well. I hadn't been there since last autumn, when we gathered for cider and chestnuts, and Father Koldo sang the old blessing songs with his uneven voice. Now, there were only the flies and the sound of a door creaking in slow rhythm, like a pendulum. The first house smelled sweet, like dried apples and wood rot. Inside, an old woman lay curled beneath a shawl, her eyes open, but looking inward. She had been dead for many days, but her body was peaceful, untouched by plague, or so it seemed. There was a small bowl of milk beside her bed, and a wooden cross still clutched in her hand. No one had come to bury her. So I knelt, and I whispered, "The song of passing, Iguz kiaren argitani bili, ama. Walk in the light of the sun, mother. Eta itzalik ezizan, and let no shadow follow you." In the second house, the hearth was cold, but the ashes were fresh. Half a loaf of bread, hard as stone, sat on a wooden plate, and a goat bleated in the back room. Tethered and wild-eyed, they had left in a hurry. I found a child's doll tucked into the rafters. She had a carved face and one eye made of a shiny black pebble. I took her, not out of theft, but because the wind had begun to sound like crying. The stories from Osoko echoed in my mind. The Genoese ship, the sickness that blackened the skin, the swelling behind the ears, the madness, the fear, the dying. But here, high in the mountains, there was no smell of death, only absence, as if people had vanished into the mist, and part of me wondered, was I already a ghost walking through their memories? That night I dreamed of the Goeko, the spirit of the night wind. My grandfather said the Goeko came when people forgot to show respect to the dark. It took the form of a dog or a shadow with glowing eyes. It whispered in a voice like snow, falling on pine needles. In my dream, it spoke, "You call to the valley, but the valley does not answer. You search for the living, but you are walking through dreams." I tried to ask if I was still alive, but my mouth was full of wool, and the wind laughed, long and slow and hollow. I woke with sweat freezing on my skin, and the sheep were still asleep. Before I left Zerby, I stopped at the well. It had once been a place of joy, a place where children shouted into the depths to hear their voices echo. Now I heard no echo, only stillness. I took a flat stone, scratched a spiral into it with my knife, the mark of protection, and dropped it into a small splash, a small prayer. And then I walked on. I stopped looking for people after that, not because I gave up, but because the mountain had begun to speak to me in other ways. The rocks beneath my feet remembered the weight of footsteps. The sheep followed me more closely now, as if they, too, understood something had changed. I spoke to them more, named them, sang old songs to them. Not for them, truly, but so I wouldn't forget the shape of my own voice. The valley had hollowed, and I had become its echo. The mountains do not fear silence. They have lived through empires, storms, and fire. They know that all things pass, even the loudest. Tragedies. But I was only a boy, and in those days I did not yet know how to mourn. I only knew how to walk. And so I walked on. Chapter 3. The Dream of Fire and Milk Mid-Spring. Aneko shelters in a mountain cave during a cold snap. Memories of his mother, lullabies, and Basque traditions mingle with dreams. The psychological shift from searching for others to keeping ancestral rhythm begins. The third week brought cold again, a breath of winter reluctant to leave the highlands. The lambs huddled near their mothers, and I wrapped myself in furs stiff with salt and travel. I found a cave I knew, one my father used when storms turned jealous. It was narrow, dry, and deep enough to hold memory. That night I built a fire from twisted pine and elder branches, and for the first time in many days I let myself remember her. My mother. She had the hands of a healer and the eyes of someone who listened to the earth. And she sang, always sang, songs older than Rome, songs whispered into my cradle, wrapped in wool and milk. In the silence of the cave I began to hum one of her lullabies. And the cave, it answered, Ametsetan Barena, Barena doa bihotsa. Through dreams it travels, the heart wanders on. I could see her, seated by the hearth, weaving rosemary into a wreath, softly beating rhythm into her lap as she sang. She always said the old songs were spells, meant to tie our breath to the mountains. You forget the song, she told me once, and the hill forgets your name. And so I remembered. I remembered how we pressed cheese in carved ashwood molds, how we painted eggs with ochre in the spring, how we left bread at the door on the solstice night for the spirits who walked between stars. All the little things, all the rhythms, not in books but in hands, in breath, in firelight. That night by the cave fire, I dreamt again. But this dream was warm. I stood in a meadow of green fire, not burning, but alive. The grass shimmered like threads of gold, and at the center stood a woman, not my mother, but made of the same earth. She was dressed in wool the color of smoke. Her hair was braided with ivy and bells, and when she looked at me, I heard every lullaby at once. Spirit woman, you carry more than yourself now. I didn't understand. I looked down, and in my arms was a lamb. Its eyes were closed, but it breathed. Spirit woman, songs are for the ones who survive. Then she touched my cheek, and I woke. The fire had gone out. The cave was pale with morning light, and the sheep stirred with slow contentment. I took it as a sign. I packed my things, tied sprigs of dried sage to my belt, and from that day forward I began to speak out loud, not to be heard, but to be remembered. I told stories to the lambs, recited folk tales to the cliffs, told the bees, when I found them, that I was still alive. This is what the elders used to do, to keep the soul from slipping into shadow, to keep the past from blowing away like ash. I had no parchment, no ink, but I found a flat stone, and with my knife I began to scratch into it, marks that only I would understand. A circle for each name I remembered, a line for each day passed, a spiral when I saw something beautiful, a cross when I buried something. It was my first ledger, not for trade, not for kings, but for memory. That afternoon a lamb died, small, pale, still damp with birth. Its mother bleated low and slow, a mournful tone I felt in my ribs. I wrapped it in wool, placed a stone upon its chest, and I sang, "Sleep, little one, don't let the dream go." The mountain wind caught the end of my song and carried it eastward. I like to think someone heard it. I no longer searched for survivors. I searched instead for the rhythm, the old rhythm, older than war, older than sickness, the heartbeat of the valley. I walked trails worn by deer. I ate wild onions and drank melted snow. And each day I scratched another mark on the stone, a journal of silence, but not a silence of despair, a silence of listening. We think survival is teeth and strength and fire, but sometimes it is this: a song remembered, a lamb buried with care, a stone scratched with spirals, a name spoken aloud so it won't be forgotten. That was the kind of shepherd I became, a shepherd of echoes, of memory, of the valley's breath. Chapter 4. The Smoke That Walks. A strange smoke appears in the valley. Aneko, guided by instinct and fear, follows its trail and encounters a surviving tanner living like a ghost. This is Aneko's first human contact since the plague's arrival. The encounter is eerie, delicate and haunting. It was late in the season when I saw the smoke, not the gentle white curls of a hearth, but thick, grey and slow to rise, like something unsure if it wanted to be seen. It came from the southern edge of the valley where the brambles tangle like forgotten hair. No homes there, not anymore, only the ruined tannery. I almost didn't follow it. Smoke meant people, people meant plague. But the wind that day, the wind carried something else, a smell not of rot but of ash and leather. So I followed. The path was overgrown, the air sour. Once this had been where we brought hides, raw from slaughter, steaming in the cold, to be scraped, soaked, stretched and salted. The tanner's name had been Lucan, a quiet man, hunched like a question. He rarely spoke except to his dog, but he always gave my father the best cuts, and now his smoke rose crookedly through the trees, and the birds did not sing nearby. I crouched behind a wall of bramble and watched. There was movement, slow, stiff, repetitive, like a wheel turning that had forgotten why it turns. A figure, thin, wrapped in dark cloth, face covered with a stained scarf. He moved between vats of rainwater and racks of drying flesh. Yes, flesh, not just leather. I felt my throat tighten. But then I saw he was burning them, the skins. He was burning every pelt, every trace, like he was erasing the world. First human interaction, ghostly and fragile. I stepped forward too fast. A branch snapped. He turned. For a moment we stared at each other. Me, with a crooked staff. Him, with hands blackened by fire and lie. His voice came like gravel rolled in wine. Lucan, hoarse, cautious. "You've no mask?" I shook my head. I had only my scarf, and a sprig of rosemary tucked behind my ear. Lucan, "Then you should leave." Aneko, "Are you alone?" He looked past me, over my shoulder, as if checking for death trailing behind. Then he said, "No one survives in the city," and went back to his fire. A shared silence around the fire. I didn't leave. I sat near the edge of the tannery, beneath a half-collapsed lean-to. He offered no food, no greeting, but he did not chase me off. So I stayed until the fire burned low. Watched the skins curl and blacken, watched the smoke rise like ghosts returning to the clouds. Finally, he spoke again. "Lucan, I burned my own boots yesterday. Didn't want to carry their footsteps anymore." He told me, slowly, like dragging stones, that the plague had taken his wife in the 3rd week. She had died, curled in the salt barrel, clutching a strip of rawhide. He had not buried her. He had salted her, not out of cruelty, but because he didn't know what else to do. Then, one by one, the skins began to talk. He said they whispered at night, not voices, not words, just a sound, like weeping through teeth. That's when he began to burn them, to silence the tannery. And does it help? Lucan, no. But the silence is cleaner now. Seen, Aneko leaves quietly at dawn. That night I didn't sleep. I listened to the fire hiss and pop, listened to Lucan hum a song I did not know, a funeral tune perhaps, or something older. When dawn came, I left without a word. He did not stop, merely raised one hand, like blessing or farewell, and as I walked back through the brambles, I realized I had met the future, and it terrified me. A man living among ghosts, burning his own past, breathing smoke instead of prayers. Was he mad, Or was he sane in a world that no longer was? I could not tell. But I understood now that surviving was not the same as living. And memory could be a weight too heavy for one soul. So I sang that night, not for him, but for the skins, for the salted wife, for the boots burned with their stories still stitched in, and the valley listened. Some people survive like stones, hard, still unchanging. Some survive like smoke, drifting, fading, clinging to whatever still burns. And some of us become songs. That is what I hope to be. Not a ghost, not a flame, but a lullaby for a valley gone silent. Chapter 5. Beneath the rowan tree, Aneko returns to the high pastures, where a lone rowan tree stands, a sacred spot from his childhood. There, he performs a quiet rite of remembrance for the dead and begins to leave offerings, creating a ritual space amid desolation. The theme centers on ancestral connection, sacred spaces, and the rebirth of meaning. A week after I left the tanner, I returned to the uplands. The sun had shifted, warmer now, but cautious, like it knew it returned to a land altered. The sheep climbed, eagerly, nostrils flaring towards sweet moss and wind-split lichen. I followed paths older than my family's name, paths carved by hooves and pilgrims, by traders and thunder. And at last I came to the rowan. It stood alone on a ledge of green stone, its red branches like veins against the sky. We called it Zuhait's Amma, the mother tree. When I was small, my mother brought me here each equinox to sing for the ancestors. We would tie red thread around its trunk and press salt and cheese into the soil. I had not been here in 3 years, but it remembered me. I removed my boots, knelt at the base, dug a shallow hollow with my fingers. From my satchel, I placed a handful of barley, a smooth stone painted with charcoal spirals, and a small tuft of fleece from the first lamb born that season. Then I whispered the names. Those I had buried, those I feared had died, and even those I did not know but had passed into shadow. Aita Zahara, Ama Iluna, Entsun Nire Abestia. Old father, dark mother, hear my song. The wind stilled, and for a heartbeat I felt not alone. She had brought warm bread wrapped in leaves, and we drank goat's milk with honey while she told stories of Mari, the spirit who lived beneath the mountains. Aneko's mother echoed in memory. If you walk with respect, she will not let you starve. She had placed a carved bone on the roots, her mother's comb, and now I left a wooden flute, one I had made myself from the hollow leg of an elder branch. I played a few notes, simple, slow, like stones falling into still water. We used to say, the rowan guarded the vale, that its berries were the eyes of spirits, and its bark the memory of lightning. To sit beneath it was to be remembered, so I sat, and I let the stillness hold me. The world below, the burning towns, the empty roads, all of it faded. Up here, the rhythm remained. Each day for a week I returned to the tree. Each day I left something small, a feather, a plait of grass, a song, and each day I whispered a new name. The shepherd who once lent us wool shears, the twins who danced in midsummer, my uncle, who carved stories into bones. They were not famous. They would never be written down in the books of the Franks or Castilians, but they lived, they sang, and I would not let them be forgotten. Encounter, signs of others. One morning I found a bundle of dried herbs tied to a branch, not mine. Someone else had come, perhaps another shepherd, perhaps a wanderer. I never saw them, but I left a mark in return, a spiral drawn in ash beside the roots, and so began a silent dialogue. One made of objects and symbols, offerings and echoes. It gave me hope, a thread, proof that I was not the only one keeping the song alive. Aneko, softly with growing warmth. The world we knew had burned, but here, in this forgotten high place, we were sowing something again. With berries and ash, with stones and song, with the quiet kindness of unseen strangers. The valley may have fallen, but this was a cathedral of wind and bark, where the souls of the lost danced like pollen in the sunlight. I left the tree on the 8th day, but it stayed with me, in the rhythm of my walking, in the softness of my breath, in the dreams where my mother still braided herbs and sang lullabies to the mountain itself. I had become a keeper of remembrance, a priest of the lost, a shepherd not just of beasts, but of silence and song. Aneko stumbles across a deserted hamlet where a chapel stands silent. Within it hangs a great bronze bell that no longer rings. Aneko, drawn by memory and mystery, discovers echoes of old rituals and grief. This chapter is about forgotten faith, ritual decay, and the search for sacred sound in a world gone quiet. The path to the chapel was not one I meant to follow. It bent away from the grazing fields, down through crooked alder trees and weeping hazels, where mist sat thick on the earth like breath held too long. I had seen the bell tower from the high ridge, just the faint line of it, a spire of wood and moss, leaning like a pilgrim in prayer. I had not expected it to still be standing, but some bones cling longer than flesh. The hamlet was a handful of crumbling cottages, roofs caved like broken backs, doors swinging loose on rusted hinges. No smoke, no animals, not even carrion, only the sound of the wind tangled in dry ivy. The chapel stood at the edge, smaller than I remembered, its stones green with age, its door slightly ajar, like it had been, waiting. I had only been inside once. My father brought me during Lent when we walked the lower paths with the other shepherds. The priest was a fat man with kind eyes, who gave me a honeyed fig when I whispered I was afraid of the incense. Remembered the sound of the bell, how it made my ribs hum, how the sheep stilled when it rang. Now, as I stepped through the doorway, it was silence that rang louder than anything. Inside was dust and shadow. The wooden benches had collapsed. A painted statue of the Virgin lay face down, cracked across her cheek. But the bell still hung in its cradle above, wrapped in spider silk and memory. It had not been rung in months, maybe longer, but its silence was not empty. It was listening. I don't know why I climbed. The steps were rotted, the air choked with dust. But I placed each foot carefully, as if treading into a sacred wound. At the top, I touched the bell's rim. Cold. I pressed my forehead against it, and it felt like touching the brow of a sleeping god. And then I spoke, Aneko, softly. I am Aneko, son of Maite, son of Gaiska. I speak for the valley, for those who have no voice. And I sang a shepherd's dirge, a simple one, meant for lambs born into stillness. Each note echoed, each note returned changed. And the bell, it did not ring, but it answered, a hum deep and slow, moved through the tower, through my bones, as if something remembered its name. Sound is the oldest prayer. Before books, before altars, there was rhythm, the beat of hands on skin, the moan of wind in caves, the call of wolves and the answer of men. This bell had known thousands of voices, weddings, deaths, plague, and now only mine, and yet it did not turn away. Before I left, I hung a single sheep bell from the old pulpit rail. It was small, barely audible, but it was mine. And when I stepped outside, a breeze stirred through the broken slats. The little bell chimed once, high, clear, and the hills answered with birdsong. Aneko whispered, I did not awaken the bell, not fully, but I reminded it that someone still listened, and in this age of dying, that was enough. There are places where sound sleeps, where prayers rot like fruit unharvested, but sometimes a single voice can stir the roots. And in that quiet resonance, I felt less alone. Chapter 7. The bone flute girl Aneko, while tending his flock on a high pass, hears a strange flute song in the fog. He discovers a feral, half-wild orphan girl playing a flute made of carved animal bone. They cannot speak the same tongue, but they begin a bond shaped by silence, music, and the instinct to survive. This chapter explores the themes of wordless connection, childhood lost, and music as memory. The first time I heard her, it was in the fog. A song, thin as a spider's breath, rising over the ridge where the sheep grazed. It wasn't bird song. It wasn't wind, it was a flute, but not like any I had heard. It bent around the stones, half wild, half hollow, like the mountain itself had begun to sing in a lost tongue. I froze, eyes wide, heart stilled, and then it vanished, just like that. Gone. That evening, I returned to the same ridge, waited, and at dusk, as the sun dipped behind the ash-black peaks, the sound came again, closer, no more than 50 paces away. I moved slowly barefoot, keeping to the moss, and there, crouched beneath a hawthorn bush, wrapped in a tattered wool cloak, was a girl. She looked no older than 10 winters, her face streaked with soot and freckles, hair in wild tangles like knotted fishing line. Her eyes were sharp, fox eyes, and in her hands she held a flute made from the leg bone of a hare, carved with spiral runes I did not recognize. She saw me, did not run, just watched. We stared for a long time. Neither moved, neither spoke. I knelt. Slowly, took out my own reed flute and placed it gently on the ground between us. Her head tilted. Then she played, one note, then another, not in melody but in reply. A call, a test, so I answered, and without words we began to speak. She never told me her name or where she had come from, but she followed me for days after that. Never close, but always visible. She stole milk from my pail, fed crusts to the lambs, and at night we would sit at opposite ends of the fire and trade songs without ever trading speech. Her face reminded me of my sister, who died at 6 winters from the spring fever. She used to hum to the bees while weaving flower. Crowns! They said she had old soul eyes. This girl had the same gaze, deep as a well untouched by fear, as if she'd already lived and died more times than I had. We made our own language. Taps of fingers on stone meant danger. The swirl of an ash mark meant food. She once left a bone figurine beside my fire, a rabbit curled like it was sleeping. A gift, I think. I gave her a sheep's horn in return, polished and hollowed. She blew into it and laughed. The only time I ever heard her laugh, it sounded like the rain starting on leaves. Reflection, wordless bonds in a dying world. When the world ends in silence, you learn to listen without needing sound. You learn that gestures are heavier than words, and that a song is more sacred than a sermon. We were strangers, but in our quiet ritual of shared breath and notes, we became something else, a makeshift family, bound, not by blood, but by surviving the same dark wind. One morning, she was gone. No trace, only her flute left on a stone, carved bone, worn smooth by small fingers. I placed it in my satchel, still have it, and sometimes, when the wind howls through the pines, and the sheep grow restless, I play a tune that isn't mine, a wild song, sharp and clear, that once echoed in Fogon, a mountain ridge, where a lost girl taught me how to listen. Chapter 8. The Feast of Crows. Aneko descends into a valley, drawn by the smell of smoke and roast meat, only to find a gathering of desperate survivors feasting around a pyre. What begins as a moment of communal warmth shifts into something darker, a reckoning of grief, guilt, and what hunger does to the human soul. This chapter explores the line between sustenance and sin, kinship and madness, in the shadow of plague. I hadn't smelled cooked meat in weeks, not since the farmsteads went quiet and the hearths stopped smoking. So when the scent reached me, roast fat, sweetened marrow, ash and spice and something else, I followed, down through a hollow of burned birch and bone-dry leaves, where even the sheep refused to tread, and there, in the valley's crook, was the fire, and the people, They were 6, maybe 7, faces hollow as masks, clothes layered in rags and filth, but their eyes were bright, too bright, as if they'd swallowed the sun and were trying to hold it in. Around them, a spit turning slowly, a goat, or what had once been a goat, its meat sizzling in the flames. A woman hummed as she stirred a pot. A man whispered prayers into a bowl of salt. They didn't look up when I approached, as if I was expected. Man, in Basque dialect. Come, eat. Aneko narrating. His voice was cracked stone, but it was kind, and I was so hungry. The meat was sweet, too sweet, but I didn't ask. There was bread, too, hard as bone, but warm. They passed a flask of bitter wine, and for a moment we weren't. Ghosts, we were kin, around a fire, telling stories with our chewing, until I noticed the silence. There was no laughter, no names exchanged, just the sounds of crows perched on the trees above. Watching. My grandmother once told me of the famine in the year of no rain, when people boiled shoe leather and ate roots that made their bellies burn, when a boy disappeared from a village and came back only in nightmares. She said, "Hunger makes saints of some and wolves of others." I never forgot it, and as I watched the faces around the fire, their sunken cheeks, their trembling fingers, I wondered which they had become. There was something wrong with the meat, not goat, not pig, too smooth, too rich. The bones, too small. For livestock, too human. I didn't speak, didn't run, just set down my plate, stood, and nodded thanks. Old woman, quietly, almost tender. He was already dead. The boy. Plague took him. We couldn't bury another. She looked at me like a child asking for forgiveness, and I didn't answer. There are no prayers for those caught between mercy and madness. I walked away slowly, not from horror, not from judgment, but from knowing how close I had come to being them. We all live closer to the edge than we dare admit. Hunger is not evil. It is a god that asks too much. The crows did not cry out. They only watched. And when the fire faded behind the trees, I turned once more toward the hills, carrying a belly full of questions, and a soul a little heavier. I did not eat for 2 days after, not because of guilt, but because I needed to remember the line between living and surviving, and how easily it breaks when the valley grows quiet. Some songs are not sung with voices, some are whispered through smoke and marrow, and the silence between names. I remember them, each face by the fire, not as monsters, but as echoes of what we all might become when the world forgets to feed us. Chapter 9. The Moon Beneath the Mountain. Aneko finds a hidden cave high in the cliffs, where his ancestors once carved symbols into the walls and offered songs to the moon beneath the mountain, a silver pool of still water. This sacred space becomes a place of refuge, where Aneko reflects on ancestry, time, and the unseen bonds that stretch across generations. This chapter is a meditation on continuity, sacred solitude, and what remains when the world outside collapses. There is a place in the cliffs that does not show on any map. No trail leads to it. No shepherd I've met remembers it. But I do. Because my mother once carried me there in a cradle of wool and pine, and I dreamed of voices carved in stone. It took me half a day to reach it, up through shale and thornbrush, where even the goats feared to tread, but my feet knew the way, as if guided by something older than muscle. I passed a dead hawk, a snake, curled in its own bones, and finally the cleft, hidden behind a sheet of hanging moss, damp with mountain breath. The cave yawned open like a mouth too tired to speak. Inside, the air was cool and sweet, earth sweet, moss sweet, and there, deep in the cave's belly, was the pool, a circle of black water, so still it looked like polished stone. Above it, symbols scratched into the rock. Wolves, stars, spirals, The same ones my grandfather once inked into my palm when I came of age. The same ones that sang in my bones. When I could not sleep, my mother used to sing of it. The moon beneath the mountain knows all names, she would whisper. Drink not with lips, but with eyes. I never understood it, not until I stood before the pool and saw my own reflection, but younger and older and not quite mine. I lit a small fire just enough to warm my hands, and I sang softly, a shepherd's hymn, but slower, deeper, and the cave answered, not with echo but with presence. It felt like someone was listening, not with ears, but with stone, with time. Reflection on ancestry and silence. This place had seen plagues before. Drought, war, children born, bones buried and still. It stood unmoved. The mountain does not care if we live or die, but the cave remembers. It is a cradle of memory, and we are only ever guests. I dipped 2 fingers into the pool, cold, so cold, and from its surface rose images, not visions, but sensations. The warmth of my sister's hair against my cheek, the crunch of snow under my grandfather's boots, the sound of my father's laugh, the day I sheared my first lamb. They came and passed like breath on glass, gone, but not forgotten. I do not ask to live forever. I only ask to be remembered well. And the water shimmered as if in answer. I left the cave before dusk, but something of me stayed behind, a shadow, a whisper, a promise that even in silence we do not disappear. We become the stones, the wind, the light in still water, and someday, when all this is ash and bone, a child will find this place again and remember us without knowing why. Chapter 10. The salt in her veins, Aneko ventures to a remote spring believed to be sacred, where, according to local law, a woman once wept tears of salt that healed the sick. There he encounters an aging healer who still tends to the sacred waters. She carries the weight of centuries, speaking in riddles and remembering a time before the plague. This chapter is about healing, forgotten wisdom, and the quiet resilience of women who remember when others forget. They say she cried the valley into being. That once, when the earth was young and grief had no name, a woman knelt on this mountain, wept until a spring rose beneath her knees, salted sacred. Cursed, maybe, but some wounds need salt to remember how to heal. It took 3 days to reach it. Past where the goats wandered, past where even the birds grew silent. I followed the scent of iron and myrrh, the trail marked by little white stones stacked in threes-like teeth. And finally, through a curtain of vines, I saw it. The spring. Still, silver, flecked with moss. And beside it, her. She sat on a flat stone as if it were a throne. Her hair was long, braided with shells, skin like parchment, weathered by sun and memory. She was not young, nor frail. She was the kind of old that does not ask permission, eyes like cave light, voice like dried time. I heard, "There's healing here." Woman, without looking, "You've heard many things. Which of them is true?" Aneko, "I don't know any more." Woman, "Then you're ready." She reached into the water and scooped up a handful, let it trickle through her fingers. The droplets hit the stone like bells. She told Meth that salt was memory, that the first tears of humankind turned the ocean bitter so. The fish would never forget how to swim upstream. She told Meth the valley used to bloom with blue flowers that opened only for the dead. She told me she had buried a child in every season. Her husband died in a fire that spared only the roof. Her first son disappeared during the first famine. Her second daughter choked on bread during the winter of the long teeth, and still she stayed, tending the spring, salting wounds, whispering the names of those the world had abandoned. She did not cry for them any more. "I gave the salt once," she said. "Now I give only silence." Scene, ritual washing. She invited me to wash my hands in the spring, not drink, not bathe, just touch. And as I did, I felt something slip from me. Not pain, but weight, the kind of sorrow you forget you've been carrying until it's gone. Woman, you are not sick, but you are broken, and there is no cure for being made of too much memory. Aneko, will I forget? Woman, no, but it will no longer own you. There are women like her in every age. They don't wear crowns, they don't demand prayers, but they remember what the rest of us cannot bear to hold. They tend to springs no one visits, tell stories no one records. They are the salt in the blood, the balm in the wound. They do not save the world, they mend it quietly. I did not ask her name. Some names are not for speaking aloud, but I remember the sound of her song as I left. A low hum, half forgotten, rising from the throat of the mountain-like. Breath returning after a long cry. Chapter 11. The wind carries their names. Aneko wanders across a high ridge where the wind never rests, a sacred place where the Basque once believed the spirits of the dead travelled to join the stars. There he listens to the murmurs in the wind, speaks the names of the lost, and discovers a forgotten ritual that binds grief to the sky. This chapter is a meditation on remembrance, ancestral grief, and the unseen threads between voice and eternity. There is a place where the wind never dies, a narrow ridge just below the sky, where clouds scrape the rocks, and even silence wears a cloak of sound. The elders said it was where the dead whispered their names, so the stars would never forget. So I climbed, not to speak, but to listen. The path was barely more than a shadow in the grass. Old stones marked the trail, stacked 3 high, 1 sideways, a language made of patience. Around me, the wind hummed like a loom, pulling threads from every leaf, every bone, every memory too heavy to carry downhill. I walked slowly, with bare feet, so the mountain might know I came in peace. My grandmother used to say, the dead travel in the wind, that when someone you love dies, you must climb the heights and shout their name into the sky 3 times, once for their soul, once for the world, and once so they know they are still loved. She called it Izena Eraman, to carry the name. I sat on a flat stone where a cairn had collapsed. Pieces of cloth fluttered. From sticks, old ribbons, a child's boot, offerings, bleached by sun and years. I didn't know the names, but I felt them pulling at the wind like threads tangled in an old tapestry, so I added my own. Amaya, my sister. Your laugh was the first song I ever heard. Aita, my father. You walked like the hills, quiet and full of stories. Aneko, my brother not by blood. You taught me to speak to clouds. Each name was a stone laid gently into the river of air, and the wind took them. Not away, but through. Amaya had a mole above her lip and used to collect feathers in an old bread satchel. She once gave me a hawk feather and said, if you hold it still, enough, it'll fly you somewhere else. She died before the snows came. I buried the satchel with her doll inside, but I never kept the feather, and so I speak her name. Reflection. Grief as a song. Grief is not a weight, it's a wind. You can't hold it, you can only let it pass through you. The trick is to sing with it, not against it. The dead do not ask for our sorrow, only for our remembering. As the sun dipped low, the sky opened in a spill of silver and dusk. The wind howled louder, not wild, but full. I closed my eyes, and I heard them. Not voices, not words, but the sound of being held, as if the mountain itself wrapped around my ribs and said, you are not alone. The wind is still there, carrying names we thought were lost. And maybe someday, when my bones lie quiet, some child will walk this ridge and hear. Me too, not with ears, but with breath, and remember that even silence can sing. Chapter 12. The Thread of the Lammas. Winter begins to creep in. Aneko finds a lamb abandoned in the snow near a ruined shepherd's shelter. Nursing it back to health, he is reminded of his childhood and the first animal he ever cared for. Through this fragile, trembling creature, Aneko rediscovers connection, caretaking, and the quiet promise of warmth in a dying world. This chapter is a meditation on fragility, nurturing, and the soft resilience of life, even amid the plague. I found Heron the edge of the world, half frozen, wrapped in frost and shadow, no mother in sight, just a scrap of wool and shiver, trembling. At the base of a crumbled stone wall, where the wind had buried her half in snow, she shouldn't have survived the night, but sometimes the smallest thread is the one that holds the whole world together. She was no bigger than my arms, a single white, ear torn at the tip, pink with cold. Her breath came in little clouds, each one a question. I didn't think. I just wrapped her in my tunic and pressed her to my chest. She bleated once, weak, like a memory, and then fell quiet. When I was 7, my mother let me raise a spring lamb. I named her Zilara, Silver, because of the way she shimmered in moonlight. She followed me everywhere, slept at my feet, and once tried to eat the edge of my book of saints. She died when a bear came through the pass. I buried her with a necklace of carved acorns. I hadn't held a lamb since, until now. I brought the new lamb to a hollow under an old pine where a ruined shepherd's hut stood, no roof, one wall leaning like an old man tired of standing. But there was dry moss and warmth from my breath. I wrapped us both in my cloak, and for the first time in many nights, I slept, not because I wanted to, but because something needed me to wake. At dawn, she stirred, nuzzled my hand, tried to stand on shaking legs. I laughed, and the sound startled us both. It had been so long since I'd made a sound. That wasn't a whisper, or a prayer. I called her Hari, thread, because that's what she became, a thread tying me back to warmth, to duty, to the part of myself that still believed in something soft. She ate pine needles and sweetgrass. I sang her songs I barely remembered, old lullabies, one about a shepherd who turned into a star to guard his flock from the sky. The world below was still. Dying, smoke curled from distant hills. I saw no other fires, no other shepherds, but with Hari I remembered that tending life is its own kind of defiance. When the world forgets how to care, you remind it with a single act of warmth. We walked together across snow-blown ridges. She trotted behind me, small hooves breaking fresh frost. Sometimes she'd stop and stare at nothing, as if she saw spirits I couldn't. I began to think she wasn't just a lamb, but a message. In stories, lambs are innocents, but in the mountains, they are more. They are what survive the thaw. They are what feed the last shepherd when the fields are empty. They are wool and warmth and will. She was all of those, and more. She sleeps beside me now, curled like a comma between what was and what might be, and I wonder, if the world ends with silence, might it also begin again with a bleat, a breath, a thread still warm? Chapter 13. The horned shadow beneath the stones. Aneko descends into a forgotten shrine built into the mountainside, a place his ancestors once feared and revered. Inside, he uncovers cave paintings, offerings, and carvings of an ancient horned vigor once worshipped by shepherds, to guard flocks and ward off pestilence. This chapter explores ancestral fear, pre-Christian memory, and how old beliefs linger in the bones of the earth, comforting and unsettling all at once. Some places are older than prayer, older than saints, older than names. They are not marked on any map, but the bones know where they are. I followed a trail of broken antlers, down a slope the goats avoided, past a thicket that smelled of iron and ash. There, beneath a shelf of black stone, was a mouth, open, dark, waiting. I had heard stories of the Ardiaran Gordia, the shepherd's hidden one, a cave carved long ago to honor something, not quite man, not quite beast. My grandmother whispered the tales when the fire grew low. of a horned figure who walked among the herds and swallowed disease before it reached the village. No one built churches. Near it, no one dared, except those who lost everything. The air inside tasted of flint and damp wool. The walls were smooth in places worn by centuries of hands. On the far wall, a painting, a figure crouched low, antlers curling to the ceiling, its body half covered in white dots, stars, spores, snow. Beneath it, tiny sheep huddled in a spiral, and around them human forms, arms raised, some kneeling, some turning away. At the base of the wall lay bowls carved from bone, blackened wool bundles, and a flute made from a sheep's rib. The air pulsed, gently. Not wind, something else, like breath trapped inside time. I knelt, not to worship, but to listen. We tell ourselves, the old gods are gone, that saints and crosses have replaced what came before. But in the hush of a cave, when the world outside is falling, we remember we are not the first to call out in the dark for something to keep us safe, even if that something has horns. I lifted the flute, hesitating. Its holes were worn with use. A shepherd had once played this, hoping for mercy. I pressed it to my lips and blew softly, a low, broken note. Then another and another. A son golder than language rose around me, not music, a murmur, a warning, or a lullaby. The walls shimmered. I saw shadows dance, a herd moving silently, a man with horns guiding them through fog. I saw a woman kneel place, her fevered child at the cave mouth, and whisper, "Take the sickness, leave the child." And something, not cruel, not kind, nodded. The child lived, the mother vanished. When I stepped back into daylight, the lamb was waiting, still, watching. Above us, a raven circled once and flew toward the next ridge. I did not speak. I did not need. Into the cave had heard me, and I had heard what sleeps beneath stone. Not all who protect wear light, not all prayers are clean, but even now, when I close my eyes, I see the horned figure watching from the dark with the stillness of someone who has seen plague before and survived it, not by running but by waiting. Chapter 14. Where the Silence Grows. Aneko enters a remote glen deep in the folds of the Pyrenees, where no birds sing, no animals stir, and even the wind seems afraid to pass. He comes to believe this place is sacred, a natural graveyard untouched by time, where the silence itself has weight and voice. This chapter explores the mystical power of silence, the reverence of untouched land, and how grief can grow like a forest, unseen but rooted. Some silences are louder than thunder. They are not empty. They are full of breath not taken, words never said, footsteps that stopped halfway through the forest. I found such a silence in a place no map names, where even the ravens do not go. The path vanished beneath my feet. There were no markers, no moss-worn cairns, no hoofprints or droppings, just an opening between two ancient pinnaces so wide at the base it felt like passing through ribs. Even Hari paused, shivering, but we went on, drawn not by curiosity but by recognition, as if something within us had once been buried here. The glen was oval, scooped from the land like a cradle for giants. The grass here grew silver, not grey, silver, like hair turned soft with age. No insects buzzed, no birds flitted. The air hung as if listening, and the silence pressed against my chest like an old hand reminding me, you are small, you are not first, you are not last. I'd heard tales whispered near hearth fires of Ilunagi, the moon hollow, a place where the souls of the dead gather not to linger, but to rest, not haunted, not cursed, just full of memory, too heavy for wind. I sat in the center on, a stone shaped like a sleeping body. Hari lay beside me, without a sound. My heartbeat was the only rhythm I could count on, and even that began to slow to match the stillness around me. I breathed in, and the silence breathed back. I saw things, not with eyes, but with skin, Women in red were laying wreaths of moss and milk teeth, a circle of children holding hands, each one blindfolded, singing without sound. A man digging with his hands alone until he found a small skull wrapped in blue linen. He wept, not from a grief, but from knowing someone still remembered. Silence is not absence, it is the soil. It is where grief goes not to die, but to root. You bury your pain there not to forget, but so it may grow into something green and sacred, into something that does not speak, but listens. I left 3 things: a braid of my own hair, a shard of obsidian from my father's pouch, and a single feather from Amaya's satchel, which I'd kept tucked in my tunic all this time. I placed them in a hollow in the earth and whispered, "Let silence keep what I cannot." The loudest. Love is sometimes the quietest, and sometimes the holiest place is where no name endures, no story is told, no echo returns, only the silence. Growing, holding, becoming. Chapter 15. The Echo of Her Hands. Aneko discovers his late mother's spindle buried beneath a cairn of river stones, leading to a dreamlike recollection of her voice, her hands, and the rituals she once taught him. Through weaving and whispered songs, he rediscovers how the dead live on, not as ghosts, but as gestures, objects, and inherited silence. This chapter is a meditation on maternal memory, craft, and the sacred act of making in a world falling apart. Did not go looking for my mother's voice, but it found Menonethelus in the shape of a river bend she once led me to, where she showed me how to gather reeds without breaking their roots, where she whispered that water remembers more than we do, where, she told me, if I am ever lost, look for what I've touched. The cairn was small, just a mound of smooth, flat stones stacked with care beside a bend where the current slowed as if to listen. Something told Methis was not a shepherd's work, it was a mother's. I knelt, lifted one stone, then another, until beneath. The 6th, I saw it, a spindle, wrapped in faded wool, the grain of the wood worn smooth by familiar hands, her hands. In our old hut, before the fever came, she spun wool at dusk, while the world darkened beyond the threshold. I would sit beside her with a bowl of chestnuts, and she would tell me which saints to call upon for rain, for safe lambing, for dreams unmarred by shadow. But she never prayed for herself, only worked, hands always moving, always turning, like the seasons. It was heavy with memory, not just hers, but all the women before her. You could feel it in the grain, calluses passed down, stories threaded between fibers. I held it as if it might warm me, and it did, not with heat, but with rhythm, the rhythm of the living and the gone walking side by side. That night I dreamed she stood beneath the moon, weaving the sky itself into a great tapestry of stars. She smiled at me but said nothing, just passed me a thread, silver, frayed, and nodded as if to say, "Finish what I began." I woke with tears already dry on my cheeks and the spindle still warm in my hands. We do not inherit only blood, we inherit hands, movements, craft, the sacred way a woman folds herbs or the hum she sings when she thinks no one hears. My mother taught me that making something is the oldest way to pray. Even now, as the world burns below, my hands remember her rhythm, and in that she endures. I pulled fibers from Hari's flank, soft and pale as moonlight, and began to spin. I spun until the light faded, until my hands ached. Then I tied the thread to the spindle and placed it atop the cairn again, not to bury, but to return, to complete, to honor. The dead are not gone. They linger in the work we do, in the songs we hum, in the warmth of the cloth we wrap around something we love. They are not ghosts, they are gestures, echoes, threads, still turning in the quiet. Chapter 16. The Waters Remember. Songs of the Drowned. Aneko follows a hidden stream to a sunken chapel once tended by river folk long vanished. Inside he finds offerings to the drowned, remnants of lullabies left behind and water-stained. Murals telling the stories of those taken by floods, sickness, or sorrow. This chapter explores how the earth remembers those forgotten by time, not in words, but in water, where memory flows forever. Some stories do not rise like fire, they sink, they settle in water, layer by layer, until even time forgets they were once told aloud. But the water remembers, it always remembers. I followed a stream thin as a goat's trail that sang only to itself. It did not gurgle like others, it whispered like a voice, trying not to be heard. It led me through a grove of twisted alders, down a slope slick with moss, to a stone arch buried in ivy and thyme, a door without hinges, a chapel without sermons. Inside, water pooled ankle deep. The floor had long surrendered to the stream. Votive candles floated in rusted bowls, tattered dolls sat in niches, each with moss for hair, shells for eyes. One wall held a mural barely intact, a woman in blue leading a child by the hand into a river that swallowed them both with silver tongues. I had never seen this place, but I knew it. We all do. It is the place we carry in the backs of our minds, where names drift away and no one remembers to say them aloud. But here in the hush of old water, someone still did. There were reeds tied with yarn, a comb left beside a candle, a braid of hair beneath a glass bowl, all offerings, all memories given to the drowned. At the base of the mural, a slab of slate bore markings faded but familiar. I traced, theme and read aloud, sleep now beneath the skyless wave, where mother's voice is tide and cave. The water keeps what time forgets, and dreams are held where sun has set. A lullaby to the lost and to those who lost them. I closed my eyes and let my hand drift in the pool. I saw shadows pass beneath, a woman combing her daughter's hair on a riverbank, a boat with no oars drifting toward a grey mist, children laying stones, in circles and singing with mouths that did not move. I opened my eyes, and the chapel was still. But the water, it watched. I sang it, not to the dead but to the grief that clings like water, filling cracks, seeping into the soul's dry places. My voice trembled, but I sang, and the echoes did not fade. They swam, they swirled, they stayed. Water does not. Asked to be remembered, it is the memory itself, the grave that breathes, the mirror that changes, the hush that hums. It does not cry out, it carries, and it keeps forever. Chapter 17. Ash and Amber. The heirlooms of silence Aneko discovers an abandoned mountain home buried in ash from an old wildfire. Inside he finds keepsakes left behind by its last family, a carved toy, a broken ring, and a bundle of herbs turned to dust. This chapter explores how objects become echoes of their owners, and how even in decay there is reverence. Through ash and silence, Aneko learns to honor what remains by remembering without words. Ash is what memory becomes when fire has had its say. It is the dust of stories never finished, never heard, never passed on. But even ash, when cradled carefully, can hold the shape of what was. I came upon the ruinby, following a trail of cinders that still whispered in the wind. A house, or what remained of one, sat half swallowed by a slope of blackened trees. Its roof had fallen in, its door hung like a broken jaw. Yet the stones of its hearth were warm in the way ancient grief is warm, quiet, settled and heavy. Inside, beneath layers of ash and silence, were things that had once meant everything to someone. A small wooden lamb, the ears chipped, its body carved with patience. A ring split down the middle, still looped around a dried braid of hair. A mortar of cracked stone filled with the ghost of crushed lavender and something darker, mugwort perhaps, or rue. These were not relics, they were heirlooms of silence. Each one held the shape of a hand now dust. Each one was a sentence cut off mid-word by fire or fever or time. But they endured, even broken. Especially broken, I wrapped them in cloth from my Satchel, careful not to disturb their stillness, not to claim them but to carry them, to remember, as my mother once said, that what is gone is not lost, only waiting for someone to listen. In my mind's eye I saw them, a father smoothing a beam with a splintered hand, a mother humming as she ground herbs, two children giggling beneath a tablet as rain pelted the roof. The fire had come later, or sickness. It didn't matter. What mattered was the breath they left behind in things. There are two ways the world remembers: ash, which falls, soft and forgetful, settling over everything until even grief forgets its shape, and amber, the golden stillness that traps a moment in light, preserving it beyond time, untouched, unbroken. These things I found were both ash and amber, falling and preserved. Sometimes what we carries not weight but witness, a shard of wood, a lock of hair, the shape of a toy forgotten by its owner. These are the heirlooms of silence, and to hold the mist, to remember without needing to speak, to grieve without needing to cry, to love without needing to know the name.